Today we're going to look at Chapter 5, the latter half of the chapter. Things like correcting image distortion. If you're looking for the one on panoramics and red-eye red-eye touch-up, you're going to have to look at the first video, 5A, that I did. But correcting image distortion. Now, the lens correction filter fixes common flaws like lens flaws such as barrel and pincushion distortion, chromatic aberration, and vignetting. Barrel distortion is a lens defect that causes straight lines to bow out towards the edges of the image. Pincushion distortion is the opposite effect, causing the straight lines to bend inward. Chromatic aberration appears as a color fringe along the edges of image objects. Vignetting occurs when the edges of an image, especially on the corners, are darker than the center. Now, let's go ahead and make some corrections to the files we have here. First, we're going to go ahead and take the column, Start, PSD. Here's corrected version. We'll make something to look like this. But here's where it starts, where there is an extreme wide-angle lens. We're talking in the probably 10 millimeter, maybe close to a fisheye, 10, 12 millimeters, maybe 14 millimeters, extremely wide-angle lens. And it's going to have some of that barrel distortion. In this case, the original image of a Greek temple is distorted, with the columns appearing to be bowed. This photo was shot at a range that was too close with a wide-angle lens. You quickly correct this lens barrel distortion. We're going to go ahead and double-click it open into Photoshop. And as the book instructs, we're going to go to File, Save As, and name it Columns Working PSD. Next, we're going to go over to Filter, Lens Correction. At the bottom of this dialog box, make sure the Show Grid and Preview are selected. That'll be the very bottom. There's Preview option and there's a Show Grid. We want both of them selected. You can see now that the grid is overlaid over top of the columns. The Lens Correction dialog includes auto correction options. You adjust one setting in the Auto Corrections tab and then customize the settings. In the correction area, we want to make sure the auto scale image is selected and the transparency is selected from the Edge menu. Right here and in here. And in this case, it already was. But you could have some other options possibly selected. Next, we're going to go into the Custom tab. And in the Custom tab, we're going to remove the distortion slider to about 52%. To remove the barrel distortion in the image. Alternatively, you could select the Remove Barrel Distortion tool and drag in the preview area until the columns are straight. Something like this. But I found 52 is what the book says, and it's pretty close to where we need to be. I'm going to go ahead and click OK from the menu box. Curving distortion caused by the wide-angle lens and the low shooting angle is now reduced significantly. Now, an optional section in the book is to compare the image before and after the last change by pressing Alt-Control-Z to go back and forth. Alt-Control-Z, and I can see it did make a pretty significant change. Another way to do it would be go to the History panel and be able to go between the last setting and the finishing setting. We'll go ahead and save, Control S or Command S on a Mac, and close the image. Next, we're going to go ahead and extend depth of field. Now, some of you may have heard of the term HDR, High Dynamic Range, where you shoot different exposures, brighter and darker. This idea is taking focusing and choosing different focusing patterns of different focusing distance and stacking them together. Depth of field is a term for how much is in focus or not in focus in a photograph. It's a photographic term used by many photographers in the world. The idea of less depth of field, a blurrier background, or more depth of field, more things are sharp and in focus. Now, there's different optics why there's parts of your photo in focus or out of focus, but this example is going to show you how to extend or to add depth of field, sharpness to multiple pictures. So first, we're going to go ahead and open our Glass Start file. You can see between the Glass Start file and the Glass End file, Now that we have the glass start option open, we're going to go ahead and turn the beach layer on and off, and you can definitely tell the difference between one is in sharp and one is not. One is focused on the glass and one is focused on the background house on the beach. First, we're going to go ahead and do a file save as. And we're going to name it as glass working.psd. Now in the layers panel, hide the beach layer so only the glass layer is visible. Now the glass is in focus, but the background is blurred. Then turn it back on and notice that the beach layer again is sharp and the rest of the glass is out of focus. So the first step we need to do is to merge the layers, combine them together. So to do that, we will go ahead and have the one layer selected and go ahead and hit Shift and click both layers. Holding Shift allows me to select both layers at the same time. Then I'll go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. Now because the images were shot from the same angle, auto will work just fine, but there are many ways you can align them in different methods if so desired. I'm going to hit auto, I'm going to hit OK. This aligns them in a much better format than I originally had set them up. Now that the images are aligned, we're going to go up to Edit, Auto Blend Layers, and we'll see a different method here. We can go to Stack Images. We're going to go ahead and make that Seamless Tones and Colors is selected, and Content Aware Fill Transparent Areas are selected. I hit OK. It'll do some processing and it's combined and trim. And so what it's done now, it's gone ahead and combined these two layers. And it will actually show you the mask of what is white and what is black to know what has been selected and re-stacked together for a total piece that looks like the beach merged file. Now this technique is super helpful in macro photography. If you're a photographer, if you're doing macro work, you're close to your subject, it's hard to get very much in focus when the closer you get to a subject. So focus stacking, making multiple different focusing settings on a flower or on a bee or something close, can allow that subject to be much crisper than one image could on its own. Focus stacking is super valuable for some type of photography. We're going to go ahead and Control S or Command S on a Mac, save our file, and then go ahead and close our particular file. Next, we're going to go ahead and start removing objects using Content Aware Fill. Take this picture of the Japanese garden start and the Japanese garden ending. So you can see what the final piece will look like. We're going to go ahead and open up the Japanese garden. And as our practice, if you haven't already figured it out, we're going to go to File, Save As. We're going to name it as File Save As Working.psd. We're going to first start with the lasso tool. Now there's many different tools. The lasso tool might be the top one, it may not, depending on your settings. We're going to start with the lasso tool, the very third on the toolbar down. We're going to drag a selection with the little marching ants, the marquee tool, around this big rock on the left. Now depending on how good your mouse tools are or not, it may not be a perfect selection, and that's okay. Something like that. Now we're going to start with dragging a selection around the rock. Now depending on how good your mouse tools are, it may be easy or it may not. Go ahead and select, including the shadow of the rock. Next we're going to go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And those give us some options to remove the rock with only a matter of a few clicks. Now the left side of the Content Aware Fill tool displays the image and the selections you've made. The colored image, which in green is displayed by default, indicates areas that the Content Aware Fill will sample from or use it as a source to do your cloning work. So it's going to be gathering from a number of different points and putting it in there. Now the right side of this menu gives you a preview, as we can see in this nice preview of what it'll actually be done with when I hit OK. The most important settings to look at, though, are first the sampling area options up here in this portion of the screen. Auto is selected by default. It analyzes the image to improve the sampling area and excludes areas that it thinks that are dissimilar to the area around the selection. Notice that the trees are not part of the sampling area. That's because Auto decided that the trees are too dissimilar to the water you selected. Rectangular uses the entire image as the sampling area except the selection, and that looks different. Now, Custom doesn't apply any initial sampling area. You use the sampling brush tool and you manually paint the parts that you want Photoshop to use in the sampling area, which will be over in this selection. It gives you more control over the whole process. Now, which one should you choose? Well, let's go ahead and start with Auto. Now, if it works well, this will give us the least amount of manual retouching. We can try some of the options when Auto produces results that aren't easy to work with, but for now, Auto is doing a pretty good job. Now, in the preview panel, we can see that parts of the selection still aren't significantly convincing. You can use the sampling brush to customize this area further. Remove maybe parts that are not as needed. And that seems to help. Now we're going to go ahead and press the bracket key, which is right next to the letter P on the keyboard, to make it a smaller brush, or we can click the next bracket key next to the Enter key to make it a larger brush, to control how much is being selected or not. We're going to go ahead and make it about 175 on our brush stroke side setting. We can see that in the Options panel. Or we can go ahead and click and drag to any size that we want. We also notice, if you look closely, there is a minus sign. It says minus here, and plus sign. Minus sign by the brush allows me to subtract portions of my screen. If I flipped over to the plus setting, I could actually start to add portions of my selection. I want to go ahead and be in the negative selection side. Now, it might take some trial and error, but the results can become quite successful and very convincing. If I want, I can also use the lasso tool to change the original selection by just continuing to trace more or less of my piece of what I want to remove. Now, notice by default, the lasso tool has a plus option. If I keep dragging plus, it'll add to my selection, add to the area that I have. If I hold Alt, it will actually start to take away portions of my selection, a negative selection. So depending on if you're on the plus or the minus side, just like you do with the sampling brush, we'll do the same thing with the lasso brush. Now we can go ahead and we can adjust the fill settings over here in the right corner. For this exercise, adjusting the color adaptation setting should be the most useful. I can go ahead and hit apply to select those settings, or I can go ahead and hit OK when I'm finished. It does the change, and then I can go ahead and hit Control D, or up at the top, select Control D or Command D automatic to deselect to remove my marching ants. And now the selection isn't perfect, but it's a lot better than if the rock wasn't there. We'll go ahead and save my work, Control S or Command S. At this point, the book actually has you do the extra credit form. We're going to bring open the thistle.psd, and we're going to use the Content Aware Move tool to do some extra selections. Now, the Content Aware tool is grouped in with the red eye tool, so we go and click and drag over. And we'll go down to the Content Aware Move tool. Now, in the Options bar up at the top, we're going to choose Extend from the Mode section. Choosing Extend duplicates the thistle if you want to make a repositioning of the single thistle and actually to make more thistles. Now, why in the world do you want to make more thistles? I have no idea. They do that very well, naturally. So we're going to make more thistles and make Roundup stay in business. With the Content Aware Move tool selected now, we're going to go ahead and draw a selection around my thistle, something like this. Make sure you don't poke yourself. About like that. We're going to go ahead and drag it to the left. About like that. Now I can right click on here and then pop up the contextual menu. And I can go to flip horizontal or flip vertically. I'm going to go down to flip horizontal, and that flips my thistle in a different direction. I'm going to drag the top left to make it a little bit smaller of a thistle, something like that. Then we go ahead and hit press enter or return, or the check marks up at the top to accept those changes. It will process for a while, and now I have a second thistle. Boom. Without even planting a seed. I can go ahead and then hit Control D or deselect from the select menu, save my changes, and move on. Now that I've done the extra credit, let's go ahead and continue through the chapter. We're going to adjust perspective in an image. We're going to look at our train image, make it look like it's on the tracks, when in actuality, the one you're going to start with is not on the tracks. It's having a derailment. You're going to open up the file. Now, I will say on some computers, if your graphics card is having issues, this may not work. Some of the graphics cards have been known, if they're an older card, to have some possible problems, especially if you're using a laptop, maybe with an integrated graphics card. You might experience some problems with this. I've known students that have had this problem over the years, and it's kind of frustrating, but you can still do most of the work, more than likely, for this chapter, even if your graphics card won't handle this one very well. Now we're going to use the perspective warp feature, which is a two-step process, defining the planes and then adjusting them. We're first going to start out with the layout mode, drawing quads to define two or more of the planes. Now it's a good idea to align the edges of the quad so that they're parallel with the lines of the original object. Then you'll switch to the warp mode and manipulate the planes that we defined. First, we can go ahead and save this file, as is our practice, as working.psd. Make sure the train layer is selected, which it is. And the tracks are on the background layer, which they are in the background. And if you look closely, notice this little icon right here. This train is a smart object feature, and that's important. If it wasn't already a smart object, we could right click and we can go to create a smart object. But it is already converted to a smart object. So with the train layer, we're going to go to Edit. We'll go down to Perspective Warp. To show up a little animated schedule showing you kind of how this works, and that might be helpful to you if it helps you to watch it. Then go ahead and close that form. Now we're going to create the quads to define the planes of the train image. So draw the quad for the side of the train. Like that. The idea of the angle or perspective where this train is coming in. About like that. Now that they have attached together, they're touching. That's great. Now we can go ahead and drag the corners to match the angles of the train. The next step, now that we've signaled our quads, is to go to the warp setting on the options bar. Click warp. And this is where the magic happens. So I want to go ahead and click the automatically straighten near vertical lines. Then I'll go ahead and create my pen tool here to warp my train to fit the tracks. Now that's a pretty good job of making it fit the tracks. So you just adjust your pins to make it fit what appears to be a natural looking formation. And let go. Now all the parts of the train now are appearing to actually fit onto the track. Really, a lot of times you just have to trust your eyes to get it right. Some of the automatic tools will help, but they're not going to do a perfect job. When you're satisfied with the way it looks, you need to commit that selection. Go to the arrow key and hit Commit Perspective Warp, or hit the Enter key on the keyboard. And that change is now complete. Now as we started, remember this is a smart filter, which is because it is a smart object. So we could actually come up to my Perspective Warp feature, and I could go ahead and re-edit that if I wanted to, if I made a mistake. Double click on this Perspective Warp, and I continue to make changes after the fact, tomorrow, next year, next millennium, whenever you come back to this file. And make it look good, or make it look, oh, it's gonna crash. Oh, it looks like some type of cartoon squishing together. Make it look good, if that's what you chose. Make it look appropriate. And then go ahead and recommit it. And I have selected my second option. Made a few tweaks because I maybe wasn't happy with the first. And because of the smart object, it's now able to have the smart filter and have it edited into the future. So go ahead and save your file. And you're done with Chapter 5. Congratulations. Thanks for watching Better Picks in just a few clicks. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to see more videos on how to take your photography to the next level.